Welcome to another episode of How the Game Was Won. We are in Baku for the FIDE World Cup 2015 and we have reached the final between Sergey Karjakin and Peter Svidler. And it's important to note that as opposed to the remainder of the World Cup, which is 2 games of chess with the classical time controls followed by rapid and blitz tiebreakers, in the final it is 4 games played with the classical time control before moving on to tiebreaks. And then another item that must be noted is by reaching the final, both Svidler and Karjakin qualify for the candidates tournament to decide who plays Carlsen for the World Championship title. Without further ado, let's have a look at how the game was won in game number 1 of the final of the 2015 Chess World Cup. White pieces, Peter Svidler; black pieces, Sergey Karjakin. Without further ado, let's see how it played itself out. Starting Nf3 Nf6 G3 D5, Bishop G2s, and Svidler here actually repeats Eljanov's approach in the rapids against Karjakin, but in that match, black's positions out of the opening seemed a little suspicious to say the least. Karjakin comes up with a different approach in this classical time control and a more conservative setup than what he did against Eljanov in the rapids. We got E6, castles, bishop E7, D3, castles, knight B to D2, and so far you can say that everything indicates that Svidler is going to be going for an early E4 and rook E1, which is the typical King's Indian attack setup. And the King's Indian attack, if you cast your mind back a couple of decades, was a favorite of Bobby Fischer as well. Another item that you need to note as well is that as far as regards the King's Indian attack setup, is computers absolutely hate these kinds of positions for white, because the number crunching of computers can't understand just how dangerous the King's Indian attack setup can be for the black king side. We continue with C5, E4, knight C6, rook E1, B5, E to D, E takes on D5, which is a fairly rare continuation, but entirely playable. Knight takes D5, knight E4, bishop E7, C3, A6. And black's position out of the opening seems good. He has a decent development, and his piece placement isn't really that bad. Now Svidler sat down for almost a 20-minute think, and at the end of that he came back with A4. And it's honestly not easy to say either side, easy for either side to figure out a continuation path. Both black and white have difficulties putting their pieces in the optimum squares, and breaking the queen side is obvious, but allows B4, which weakens C3. And as we continue with B4, bishop G5, F6, bishop D2, E5, which is a sort of a Rxc type of structure, but obviously with its own unique subtleties. Rook C1, rook F7, and D4. This move is incredibly uncomfortable for black to be able to deal with. And it's known in chess that when one side spends its resources to prevent a pawn break, and the opponent executes that pawn break successfully, regardless of the attempts of the opponent to block it, bad things tend to happen. And we continue with, say, B takes on C3, and in my eyes, opening up the B file only helps white in this situation. For instance, black could have continued with e takes d4, c takes, bishop h3, bishop c8, and white retains some pressure, but this looks much more acceptable than what turned out in the game. Because after b takes c3, b takes c3, c takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, e takes d4, queen b3, and white is down a pawn. But his pieces are coordinating much better with each other, and all of Karjakin's pieces are separately targets for the white pieces. And right now, there are various potential pins that involve the knight that is sitting on d5. All of them will be difficult to deal with. Already black has to be careful not losing material, but honestly, he might already be worse. Rook b8 is what was played, but the alternative could have been, say, for instance, queen d7, bishop a5, rook c8, rook takes c8, queen takes c8, knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, which leaves an incredibly unpleasant position for black to be able to deal with. As is, we've got rook b1, queen d7, rook c1 is what was actually played, and the rook at e to c1, you can say, is Svidler applying remarkable patience. He's not in a rush to recover his pawn, but simply improves the positioning of his pieces. Obviously, at any stage he can recover his pawn, so because there's no risk of not being able to recover his material, he makes use of his tempi to be able to better place his pieces. Black is completely tied down, and his extra pawn is just for show. Next, Karjakin comes along and plays queen e6, which just simply loses a piece. But already it's hard to suggest an alternative. For instance, f5, knight c5, bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, knight f6, bishop f4, rook c8, rook takes c on c8, bishop takes on c8, queen c4. And the position looks ugly because you've got rook b8 coming along, which just in turn pins that bishop back against the king and just makes an extra target for, say for instance, for the white queen. So it just looks really, really ugly. But getting back to the game in hand, as I mentioned, queen e6 just simply loses a piece, and Svidler is no slouch, so he duly obliges and picks up the combination with knight c5, bishop takes, rook d8, bishop a5, rook d6, queen c4. The threat here is both a rook takes on b7 as well as a bishop taking on d5, and both of which bode incredibly well for white and incredibly badly for black. Knight c3, rook takes on b7, there the b7 falls, and that is basically you can call it the end of the game. Queen e1 was played, bishop f1, the rook on b7 for instance can't be taken at all, so the game is effectively over. And the reason why the rook can't be taken, most obviously, is that because if the rook is taken, you've just simply got the rook up to the rook coming up to c8, which basically either threatens a mate down the back rank, or if the king comes back up to f7 for instance, the rook just simply bounces back to c6 with check and picks up the rook. So the rook falls, and black is effectively sucker punched. For instance, knight e2 was played, knight e2 check was played in the game, followed by queen takes on e2. Now, bearing in mind that in this situation Karjakin resigned because after queen e2, queen takes on e2, we got queen takes on e2, rook b8 check, rook f8, rook takes f8 check, king takes f8, and bishop e2. And coming out of this, you're coming into the endgame with a rook and pawn endgame, but with the difference is that white is a clear 2 bishops up, which makes it a dead easy endgame to win, especially when you're dealing with the classical time controls and a player of Svidler's strength. So Karjakin resigned the game. One game played in the final of the FIDE World Cup, and one game won already. So Svidler leads the match 1-0, and it's up to Karjakin to bring the match back over the course of the next 3 games. Tomorrow he has the white pieces. Let's wait and see what he's able to do. So that, my friends, is how the game was won. Please feel free to share this video out amongst your chess friends. Give this video a thumbs up if you like this type of content, thumbs down if not, that way I know what to be putting out in the future. And post any comments, questions, criticisms that you may have down below. And last but by no means least, if you're watching this in the YouTube viewer, down just below the screen where you're watching the game at the moment is a big red subscribe button. Hit that subscribe button, that way you stay subscribed to my channel for all the content that comes out on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Stay carved up for the win, stay safe out there, and until the next episode of How the Game Was Won, I'll see you then.